We are told that before partaking of the emblems, we are to examine ourselves through the word of exhortation. And that process today is to be exercised by our brother Jonathan. Brother John.
Morning, brothers and sisters. I wanted to give this exhortation on John chapter 9 for a little while now. And when I sat down to write it, I thought it was going to be real easy because I already knew what I wanted to write about. As I got further and further into it, I realized that there's so much in this chapter about the man that Jesus healed who was born blind. You can make an entire exhortation out of just the Pharisees' reaction, Christ being the light of the world. There's so much in it, but what I really wanted to pick out was one thing that stood out to me that I felt left the most impression on me, so I wanted to see if I could convey that message to you today. Providence is defined as divine guidance or care. Brother Roberts called it divine participation in human affairs. My dad has given an exhortation in which he points out examples of this. One story was of a brother who made a left instead of a right when he had a couple of hours to kill at a conference, and ended up meeting a brother who taught him the truth. Years later, he married a woman he had taught the truth to, and he even has a son in the truth. And consequently, he helped teach my wife the truth as her Sunday school teacher. The guiding hand of God led him down to the water. All he had to do was drink it. Another story was of a piano tuner who went to a house for a job and ended up meeting a family in the truth and learned and was baptized. Perhaps we can all think of circumstances in our own lives where God's providence has played a hand. Brother Roberts pointed out the seeming contradiction that the same acts may be at once human and divine. Human as regards the impulse and design of the performer, and divine as regards the initiation and regulation of that impulse and the objects to be accomplished in its execution. In other words, the fact that the piano was out of tune was natural. Maybe it had been played many years without being tuned, or perhaps, as in my house when we were younger, the kids were just banging away at those keys all day. Nonetheless, going into a house to tune a piano was no strange occurrence in that man's life. The fact that this piano happened to be in the house of a Christadelphian family was God's providence. God was in the process of calling this man out of the world of darkness. He just needed a mechanism with which to make it happen. We often speak of trials. The trials we personally go through, the trials others are going through, the trials of those men and women we read about in Scripture. One question that may come up often in moments of quiet contemplation of our own trials is why? Why is this the cross that I must bear? Why did this happen to me? Why, God? This was the question that Jewish rabbis and even Christ's disciples were trying to answer in the days of Christ. We read in John chapter 9 the story of Jesus healing a man who had been blind from birth. This is the only recorded account of this particular story in any of the four Gospels. It is unique to the book of John. It begins, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from birth. Being born blind, back then, was looked at differently than one who became blind later in life. For one, being born blind meant a life without work. There was no Americans with Disabilities Act, like we have in this country today, to assist those who have a handicap. Being born blind meant a life of being destitute. After Jesus gives him sight, his neighbors say, "Is this not he that sat and begged?" When Jesus first saw the man, his disciples asked him, "Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" This is a surprising question at best, and a ludicrous one at worst. We know that everybody sins, and time and chance happeneth to all men. So where would the people closest to Christ come up with a query like that? As it turns out, this was a hotly contested debate in those days. The Jewish rabbis believed that there was no suffering without iniquity. That is why the fact that this man was born blind was noteworthy. If he had been struck blind halfway through life, they could have easily explained, as Job's friends did, that he surely did something to receive the wrath of God. Remember, according to them, there had to be iniquity for there to be suffering. One question that stumped them, though, was how one could be born blind. Hence the question, who did sin, this man or his parents? It was a commonly held belief that if the parents had sinned while their child was in the womb, God's wrath would be felt. There was even a minority of rabbis who thought that a child could sin in the womb or in a state of previous existence. That's how tough of a time they were having, explaining the fact that there is no suffering without iniquity, yet a man could be born blind. Being born blind would be an awful affliction, one we would all pity. To never be able to appreciate the beauty of God's creation, or to be able to see the people you love, how much it would hold you back professionally, even today. How hard it would be to get around. You can't drive, you can hardly walk. The lack of freedom and independence. There was no Braille system yet to read and write, so you're illiterate. It would be awful. Imagine having a child born blind. You'd feel such pain for them, such sorrow. You'd probably feel somehow responsible that you brought this child into the world and into such misery. Remember, the man who Jesus gave sight to had previously sat and begged. Parents want the best for their children, not a life of sitting on the roadside begging. The disciples got caught up in this debate of what sin brought this affliction upon this individual. Obviously, something was done to deserve this fate. And that's what we do sometimes too. We ask God, why? If you were this blind man from John chapter 9, wouldn't you have spent your entire life asking why? This man was blessed enough to receive an answer to his question. Jesus tells the man, while rebuking his disciples, in verse 3, Jesus answered, "Neither has this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him." Every time this poor blind kid was mocked or picked on, every time he stubbed his toe or tripped on something, all the pain his parents felt, enduring an adult life with begging as your only means of support, being looked down upon by society, all of these horrible things that nobody would ever voluntarily sign up for, all of these things were happening while he was led, providentially, divinely cared for, even while he suffered these things, down that path that would lead him to this day in his life, where he would come face to face with the Son of God. Christ would not only heal his blindness, but provide a way out of the true darkness this man had lived in. And he said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Brothers and sisters, we must think of our own trials in this life. any one of our worst trials may have actually been beneficial to us if it led us down that path that this blind man was being led on. If it ultimately got us to where we are right now on this morning, gathered around these emblems. Brother Roberts wrote a book called The Ways of Providence. He wrote, "Our part is to fear God, keep the commandments, and go forth with courage and trust, believing the assurance that all things work together for good for those who love God. It is ours to conform in all modesty to what God has required, without reference to the undeterminable question of where and when He works during the present walk of faith."